Dr. Sarah Brin is a clinical psychologist and parenting expert focused on child development, attachment, and neurodiversity. She co-founded Upsure Brin Psychology Group and hosts a Securely Attached podcast, translating research into practical strategies for families. Her work emphasizes emotional regulation, resilience, and compassionate parenting from infancy through adolescence. Clarissa Harwell is a licensed clinical social worker and a psychotherapist specializing in neurodivergence, trauma, and LGBTQIA+ care. She directs behavioral health programs, conducts autism and ADHD assessments, and trains schools and agencies on neurodivergent affirming parenting. Clarissa brings extensive experience in crisis intervention and family support. Dr. Megan Salee is a licensed psychologist and professor at Beacon College, the nation's first accredited baccalaureate institution dedicated to educating neurodivergent students. She specializes in neuropsychological assessment, ADHD, and evidence-based therapies. With extensive clinical experience in family systems and behavioral health, she trains psychiatry residents and supports caregivers through interventions like CBT, DBT, and ACT, promoting mental health across diverse populations. And we're going to begin our conversation with Sarah. How does secure attachment influence a child's resilience when raised by a single parent?
So we know that from many long-term studies that secure attachment is associated with all kinds of positive outcomes that are connected to a child's resilience in childhood all the way through adulthood. Things like better mental and physical health, stronger relationships, even academic and vocational success are all associated with secure attachment, relationships formed early on in life. And I do feel like a lot of single parents can often worry that, if their child is maybe potentially missing that the benefits of that secure attachment potential if there's only one parent. But the attachment science is very reassuring here. Decades of research shows us that secure attachment it's much less about how many caregivers a child has and much more about the quality of the attachment relationship, and even at least one key relationship that is secure in nature is predictive of secure attachment in childhood and through adulthood. So when we have at least one adult who is generally, as much as they can be, emotionally available, who tries to understand their child, who comes back to repair when we miss a tune, and just helps that child feel seen and safe and soothed a good amount of the time. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't have to happen all the time. The child can really, truly internalize this sense of I matter, I'm not alone. When things are hard, someone shows up for me. These are all the building blocks of that secure attachment. And it's really important, I think, for single parents to know, like, the attunement and emotional responsiveness that predicts this relationship and the security, it does not have to happen all the time. Good enough is actually optimal here. So we know that the research says that when parents are able to kind of get it right, even 30% of the time, we still are able to predict a secure attachment outcome. So that's very, very helpful and hopeful for parents who are doing this on their own.
All right, well, great. Well, Clarissa, how can a single parent take some steps to create a neurodivergent affirming household?
I really appreciate this question. There's a few things that parents can do that are fairly affordable, straightforward. One of those things is, I think of it as putting on your detective hat for a week or two. Ideally, this means parent is noticing their child's daily rhythms and patterns. What is your child drawn to when they're bored, when they're stressed, when they're seeking comfort, when they're seeking sensory input, and then adding in things that you notice your child needs at certain times. Many kids, for example, come home from school, if they attend school, and either need to zone out or they need to have a big rambunctious play period with a lot of gross motor play, pushing things, pulling things. So incorporating things into your home. When my kids were little, they're both neurodivergent. We had a mini trampoline in front of the TV, beanbag chairs to jump on instead of, real furniture. And swings in the yard, monkey bars. And we certainly don't need all that, but we do want to keep our mind on the sensory needs of our child. A place to retreat when they need to retreat and decompress after being out in the world, which can be difficult and overwhelming and overstimulating, as well as novelty and input, sensory input when they are bored or seeking connection.
All right, thank you. So, Megan, can you walk us through some psychological factors that single parents need to understand about their way that their child thinks and learns early on?
Yeah, sure. So for our neurodivergent kiddos, this is not going to be a secret to them from early on that maybe they're feeling different than their peers. They are probably getting a lot more negative feedback from the adults in their life. And so they may become pretty quickly more sensitive to some of these things, and we may see some bigger emotions. They may be more anxious, more frustrated, sad about things, and this may be displayed in maybe crying or acting out, yelling, being a little destructive. And so for the parents, it's really important to not overreact to that and not overinterpret that and start thinking, oh no, here we are. This is what it's going to look like forever. And so we want to employ some strategies that can help with those big emotions and help that not be sort of the center of the child's development. Excuse me. So, some things we talk about is catching the child being good, right? And so for our neurodivergent children, they're getting a lot of negative feedback or corrective feedback. We need to catch them at times when they're doing things that they should be doing, or they're doing things well, or they're on their way to doing something well. So catching them while they're still sitting in that chair and saying, "Oh, I love how you're staying in your seat during dinner," those little moments where they're getting some positive feedback. And then that helps us enjoy the parenting too, where we're not feeling like we're constantly having to give negative feedback, right? So there's a magic number. Some people say 4-to-1, some 5-to-1 of positive to negative. So for every negative interaction, we're trying to find 4 or 5 opportunities where we can give some praise to our child on the things they're working on and the things they're doing well. And then one other thing would be, some of these kiddos have a slower processing speed. So we need to give them time to hear and interpret and understand and put into action anything we're asking them to do. So in my house, we have a 10-second rule. So if I give a command, I'm waiting 10 seconds until I say anything else, so that their brains don't get jumbled and overwhelmed and they can start to take some action. So those are the things that I think early on can be really helpful in their development.
All right, well, thank you. So, Dr. Beren, how can single parents foster emotional regulation during stressful transitions like school mornings?
Yes, the school mornings are probably one of the most common stressors I hear parents talk about, because they present this very unique, perfect storm of time pressure, a lot of sensory overwhelm, and also a lot of executive functioning demands on the parents and the child. And so I think we have to understand, when we want to talk about emotion regulation, it's like, what are the building blocks of self-regulation in children? And that really is going to come from the capacity for the adults in their lives to co-regulate, and also for the environment to be predictable and manageable for them. And so basically this means before a child is going to be able to regulate their emotional state, we have to be their external regulator, their external planner, and we have to share our calm with them. So in order to do that, we have to possess these skills. We have to have access to them. We have to have gas in our tank to be able to access our own regulation. And we have to be kind of maintaining an environment that's relatively conducive to a calm and organized morning. So a lot of the practical suggestions I work families through are actually more about what the parent needs in these mornings than the kid, because it's going to flow through us to them. So any place where we can regulate our own state, where we can make sure our basic needs are met, that means maybe we're waking up a little bit earlier and having a cup of coffee or having some food or at least a glass of water. We need to be able to have our own needs met so we can kind of manage the energy of the morning. And then anything that we could do to triage or prioritize. So what can we do the night before? What can we say we're not doing at all? Anything to get things more organized and ready ahead of time, so we're not having to make these decisions in the morning or get our kids to make decisions in the morning. And then finally, I think there's a level of stress resilience and stress management that we have to take. So when we can reduce urgency, when we can reduce a sense of panic that this isn't going to go well, that can also be super helpful. So mindset, breathing, reminding ourselves, even if it gets messy, we're going to get through this. We have a try again tomorrow. Can all be really helpful.
All right. So Clarissa, can you walk us through some techniques that can help single parents manage meltdowns without any additional adult support?
Yeah, I want to acknowledge how tough meltdowns are, both for the parent and the child. They're not tantrums. They're not our children trying to manipulate us. And if we can go into parenting with that lens, that this is a neurological distress response, this is not a manipulation, we're automatically going to access more compassion for our children during meltdowns. For single parents, whether by choice or by circumstance, there's not always another adult around, another helpful adult around to co-regulate with, to process with. And meltdowns, even in the best of circumstances with a wealth of safe adults and resources, they're just really hard. They're exhausting and they're difficult. So I take a 3-prong approach. One of those is putting our detective hat back on as the parent and noticing all the things throughout a day or a week in our children's life that might lead up to a meltdown. Parents often tell me things like, well, he just had a meltdown because he didn't get the toy he wanted at Target. That might be it, but that was probably the last straw in a series of challenges, disappointments, expectations not being met, feeling different and rejected by peers. So there's a series of accumulated events usually and feelings that become too overwhelming and lead to the meltdown. I've never seen it really truly be just one thing that leads to it. So when we have our detective hat back on, we're noticing what disappoints our child, what stresses them out. They may be verbally communicating this and they may not be. So we're really playing detective here. Another approach with meltdowns is managing safety during the meltdown. This is huge. We can do a lot of environment management before a meltdown happens. We cannot entirely prevent a meltdown from occurring, although over time, as we get better at noticing, we can reduce their frequency, but we can't entirely prevent them. Adult neurodivergent people have meltdowns too, but we want to make the environment as safe as possible. I've seen many children during a meltdown destroy their own beloved possessions and then later are filled with regret and shame. And we want to make sure there's no dangerous objects around that a child could break or throw, destroy. And ideally, we have access to the parent who has enough access to their own self-regulation that they can stay as calm as possible for their child. Not an easy feat, and we are going to mess this up at times because it is so distressing, but doing our best to stay nearby during the meltdown. Try to not take personally what your child says or does during the meltdown because it truly is not in their control at that point. And then the third prong of this approach is support and processing afterwards for the parent. This could be an online support group. I've seen a lot of social media groups for parents of neurodivergent children that are very affirming, not pathologizing of our children. Or it could be a therapist, a friend, a spiritual guide, whatever it is for somebody. Having a safe space for a parent to process and sort of expend that energy that they've, for better or worse, sort of taken on after their child's meltdown is really important. The child is exhausted after a meltdown, and so is the parent. So taking care of yourself after the fact is crucial.
All right, well, thank you. So Dr. Salih, When you're raising a neurodivergent child, parental advocacy is often the most stressful and overwhelming part of the process, and it must be even amplified when you're a single parent. Can you provide us some strategies that single parents can utilize to effectively advocate for educational accommodations for their child?
Sure. So you're absolutely right. I mean, this is a very time consuming process. So it adds an even bigger toll when we're talking about a single parent taking this on. Um, so my thought with advocating is include the child as early as possible, as early and often, because you want that child, really by middle school to be starting to advocate for themselves and be able to talk to the adults around them and the peers around them for, what they need and what works. Now, you would still be assisting them at that point, but including them early on, it may start when they're little, preschool, just talking to them about it. What helps you, what feels good at school, what doesn't. So they're involved in the conversation. And then maybe that will move toward the communication. Maybe you're writing with a teacher that you're reading those emails and checking with them. Maybe they're coming to some of the meetings that you have with teachers and administrators so that they're part of that conversation and they see you modeling how you have those conversations and how you manage the information. And then along those lines, as I say, modeling, right, what we want to do is really develop some positive relationships with the teachers. We want to see them as our collaborator, as our teammate, not our adversary. And so from the very beginning of the school year, my recommendation is to set up an individual meeting and discuss with that teacher what your concerns are, what has worked in school and at home, and then invite them for their expertise, right? What has worked in your classroom? Will these things work in the way that you run your classroom? Do you have other ideas? I really appreciate your input and coming up with a plan together. And again, so that way you feel like you're coming from it from the same direction and that you're not in this fight for what you need. Because even simple interventions in the classroom can be very powerful. So those relationships can help you find those right interventions and then including the child with it over time. In the beginning, that's a little extra effort, but over time, it allows you to step back and it gives you the confidence too that my child's going to be okay because they know how to go after the things that they need and that they deserve.
All right, thank you. So, Dr. Byrne, can you share with us any practices that single parents can employ to strengthen the parent-child bond when time and energy are both stretched thin?
Absolutely. I think that it is hopefully very encouraging for single parents to remind themselves that attachment and just the relationship we have with our child is really going to be so influenced by these micro moments of attuned connection that we have with our kid that helps them feel seen by us. It's really not about these big shows or really intentional planning of big, elaborate, special time together. Those things can be fun, but they can create a tremendous amount of pressure for us, especially if we're like seeing all of the social media, pressures to sort of put on these elaborate bonding experiences with our kids. The reality is attachment is built in small, repeated interactions in our day-to-day life. And, the more we can just practice that mindful awareness of our relationship with our child in the mundane, everyday moments, the better. So I'm also, for whether you're a single parent or any parent, like we are busy. And so any way that we can turn anything that we're doing into to perform double duty for us is very economical and important. So I break it into sort of two important categories. There's the time that we have with our kids that it's like want something time. I'm going to invite you to participate in caregiving activities. And when I'm engaging in these tasks I'm already doing, I'm going to give you my full undivided attention and presence. And when I'm doing tasks of like home management, like maybe I'm prepping dinner or I'm going to the grocery store, I'm going to bring you with me and I'm going to invite you to participate in this activity with me. So it's this idea of integrating them into our lives and finding these little moments of connection time. And then there's this other category of what some might call wants nothing time, where, and again, this doesn't need to be a lot of significant time. It's always really more important about quality over quantity. But can I find 5 to 10 minutes a day where I am really having no agenda with my kid? I'm just with them. I'm following their lead. I'm letting them direct the play or the conversation. I'm curious. I'm just tracking with them. And I'm looking for moments of delight with my child. One of the biggest predictors of a secure attachment relationship is the parent's ability to delight in their child and for that child to feel that. So little moments in the day are perfect for that, actually. So less pressure, more presence.
All right, thank you. So Clarissa, presumably single parents are pouring all their time and energy into caring for the needs of their neurodivergent children. But the question here is, who cares for the caregiver? What can single parents do to maintain their own mental health and care?
I really appreciate this question. I would like us as a society to focus on it more. Who cares for the carers? There's multiple factors here. And I think in mainstream culture, we hear a lot of take time to yourself, self-care, pampering. Nothing wrong with those sort of mainstream ideas. I think they're not accessible for all of us, certainly not in every moment. Some of them require financial resources that not everybody has. And for single parents in particular, it's not always doable to have time alone or time away from your child. Single parents are doing it all, from school readiness, bedtime routines, and everything in between. So it's not realistic to tell a single parent, well, take a couple hours to yourself every day. I'm sure most of us would like that, but not everybody gets it. So indirectly, there's two things I think about when I talk about what helps parents tend to their own mental well-being and emotional well-being. And one of those, not obvious on the surface, but one of those is access to neurodiversity affirming sources of information. I have seen this as maybe the single most effective way that parents increase their own mental well-being is actually by immersing themselves in the world of neurodiversity, learning about what neurodiversity is, what affirming care is, that neurodivergence is a normal part of neurodiversity. Your neurodivergent child is not flawed or broken, and really starting to parent and view your child and how they are in the world through that lens decreases parental anxiety and fear, and less likely to be depressed when we're less worried about our child. So access to good quality neurodiversity affirming resources really indirectly supports the carer's mental health. And the other piece that I think is really important that perhaps we don't talk about enough is helping a parent identify their own sensory wants and needs. There's a lot of focus, as there should be, on what our kids need and how to help them thrive, their sensory environment. Parents also have sensory needs. For example, when my kids were little, one of my kids vocally stims quite often, and I want him to be free to do that. But the sound really wore me down. It was really hard for me. I was getting more irritable, more anxious. I needed noise canceling headphones as much as my children did. And accommodating our own sensory needs doesn't feel obvious because we are so focused on our children all the time. But looking around your own world and what things stress you out, what sounds bug you, what kind of touch bothers you, ways that you can get your sensory needs met while you are with your child has been really, really, really helpful for the parents I work with.
All right, thank you. So, Dr. Salih, I wanted to piggyback on what Clarissa was just saying and drill down a little further. How can single parents identify signs of early burnout and take preventative measures?
Yeah, there are so many demands on parents these days. And so if we put on top of that having a neurodivergent child, and then on top of that being a single parent, that is exponentially putting yourself at more risk for burnout. I don't know if I'd even believe someone if they told me they weren't burnout being in those situations. There's just so many things that we're trying to do and take care of and think about. And so when we're feeling burnt out, it's really hard to have compassion for other people. And taking care of children and taking care of neurodiverse children really requires a good bit of compassion and patience. And so when we start to feel like we just don't have that compassion anymore, when we just have nothing to give and we're overwhelmed and we're frustrated easily and irritable, we know, wow, we've got to do something to turn this around. And so even better, as you've said, is when we can be preventative about that. We can try to keep the burnout at bay. What we've heard already, I think, is so important. So one, the less pressure, I wrote this down, I'm going to start saying this to myself, less pressure, more presence, right? That is critical. And when we think about presence, I ask parents to think about their own childhood and the memories you have and the moments that felt really connected and really good. They're probably not, as we've heard today, these grand gestures. They're like sitting at the kitchen table with grandma over cookies, right? They're little moments, they're smiles that we've gotten, they're hugs that we've gotten. And so that stuff takes far less time and can be really, really meaningful. And then again, that good quality information about neurodiversity is important because it helps us have reasonable expectations, and reasonable expectations will help prevent burnout. So we are never going for perfection. Perfection is not the goal. Perfection is not possible, as my middle schooler likes to remind me. And I appreciate that she has that take. So we're good is good enough. That's what we're going for. And so we need to think about also how we're talking to ourselves. That might be one of the biggest pieces when it comes to burnout, because if we're down on ourselves, if we're feeling guilty that we're not doing enough, and single parents are especially vulnerable for this. I'm not doing enough. We don't have the resources. We can't do all the things. That starts to send us into a spiral of guilt and shame. And those feelings are not going to help us show up as the parents that we want to be. So when we catch ourselves starting to talk to ourselves in that way, we need to make a shift, and we need to remind ourselves we are doing the best we can. We're doing some things well. And where we start is not where we finish. We can improve over time. And so we need to talk to ourselves in a way that we would want the world talking to our children, right? And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And then there's some practical things like journaling, and it doesn't have to be writing because I know no one has time. You can make some little audio notes to yourself just to get it out. We can do some 5-minute meditation. That's not going to change the world. It's not going to solve anything, but it's going to put you in a far better position when you're in traffic and you're not already overwhelmed, right? So we can do some of these little things, but we also have to be really careful, again, of how we're talking to ourselves and treating ourselves and what we're expecting of ourselves.
So, Dr. Bren, I imagine being a single parent can be really a lonely experience sometime. So I'm wondering, what role do peer groups play in helping to reduce that isolation they may feel as a single parent?
Yeah, it's really important to have systems in place. We talk a lot in when we're working with kids about how we need a village, and it is exceptionally true in the case of single parenthood. And having a village that understands the unique needs of a neurodiverse family is even more important. Many of the single parents that I speak with who are raising neurodivergent kids feel really isolated, and their friends just may not understand, why birthday parties are really hard, or why homework takes 3 hours, or why everyone's tired all the time, or why they have to say no to a lot more things. And people can interpret that, as people can interpret that in unintended ways. And so having a peer support group, whether it's a formal one, like an actual group that meets regularly, where people really understand the unique needs of a parent raising a neurodiverse kid, it could be incredibly helpful to reduce a sense of isolation or a sense of guilt or a sense of, I'm not doing this well enough, right? Because everyone in that space is going to be able to share similar stories and give each other resources and like crowdsource some of the mental load that we have to generate as parents. But I also, going back to what I was saying earlier about making things do double duty, while I think it's fantastic to have a peer support group, if that feels like too much to add to your plate, I think that finding ways to plug into your community in ways that are already accessible to you can also be incredibly protective of isolation. So if you are already volunteering on your kids' soccer team or the PTA, or you are taking a pottery class, like whatever you're doing, wherever you're plugged in, finding ways to build community there. And a lot of these opportunities, there's this reciprocal nature to them, right? When single parents may have a hard time asking for help, but when we are giving help, maybe it's at the PTA, we're volunteering to do something, then there's this reciprocality that comes in so that it feels a little more comfortable to say, hey, can we carpool later? Or, finding ways to just have a community that shares the load in as many ways as possible can also really help protect against isolation.
So, Clarissa, probably one of the common occurrences single parents might run into is when they're in a social situation trying to combat the stigma of raising a neurodivergent child. Can you give us some tips on how they can deal with this situation? Because I imagine when you're alone trying to fight this crowd, you feel kind of overwhelmed.
It is overwhelming. Parenting can be a lonely endeavor, even in the best of times. Parenting solo, parenting a child who society has deemed different is daunting at times, not because our children are difficult or any less than, but because of the way that society stigmatizes our children. I have not met ever a parent of a neurodivergent child who has not experienced judgment from other parents. And of course, parents of neurotypical children experience judgment too. But I've found the judgment of parents who are parenting a neurodivergent child to be more based in stigma, a lot of social judgment from adults, but also from peers. And it can be heartbreaking for a parent to witness their child be judged by their peers or by other parents or by teachers or people in the school system. I think building community is really important here so that we're not going it alone. It can be overwhelming and distressing in the moment to need to advocate for your child and assert yourself, especially if it's not something that you're used to doing. So I talk to parents about it's sort of like building a muscle, using our voice, using our assertiveness to advocate for our child gets easier over time the more we do it, but it might always feel a little bit difficult. So surrounding ourselves, and it doesn't have to be in person. Not everybody has access to a large community of neurodiversity affirming people, but there's lots of amazing communities online. And although those communities aren't with you in the moment when your child is at a playground being judged and parents are looking at you funny because your child's behavior or a meltdown in public, which is one of the hardest things for the child and the parent, having that sense of community just in the back of your mind, knowing that you're standing on the shoulders of advocates who have come before you, have a community behind you, even if not in reality behind you, I think helps parents feel really connected and understood so that they are fortified to go out in the world and combat that stigma that their child will face every day. And then finally, being the soft landing space for that child. There's so much stigma out in the world, and our neurodivergent children go out into school or playgrounds or wherever they are out in the world, and they experience judgment and stigma and a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of misattribution of their behaviors. And if we can be their soft landing spot and we can be understanding that we know they're not a bad kid, we know that they have sensory overwhelm and they need to shut down sometimes, or they might lash out because they're overstimulated, and we have compassion, that helps us access it when we are out in the world. We can be our child's best advocate. Our children see us advocating for them and learn, as Dr. Salih said, to advocate for themselves over time as they get older. But I think the number one thing really is building that sense of community so you're not doing it alone. It is tough to have a neurodivergent child. And again, it's not because the child is tough, it's because the world is not designed for neurodivergent children quite yet. So getting that support, whether online, in person, so that you can go out into the world and be an advocate, I think really fortifies parents to keep this advocacy going in a sustainable way.
So, Dr. Salih, you're going to have the last word in our conversation. I want you to put on your coach's whistle and give me your best pep talk for single parents raising neurodivergent children.
Okay, so it's hard. It's really, really hard. And so if it's feeling hard, it's because it is hard. And you're doing enough. I think that's a lot of single parents do not feel like they're doing enough. They worry about all the things they're not doing. And then that can snowball into some really tough feelings and increase burnout. And so I really encourage the single parents out there to give themselves credit for the things they are doing and how hard those things are, and to reward themselves for that, to give themselves credit, to acknowledge that, hey, we're getting out of bed and we're getting dressed and we're getting to school and, we're doing these things. My kids are fed. And even if it's the same meal every single day, they're fed, right? And it will not be what it is right now in the future. We like to project out the worst case scenarios. And I want parents to be able to enjoy the moments now and allow themselves the permission to think about the fun that they can have and the good times they can have in the future, that they can look forward to things and give their attention to some of the wonderful things that are happening now. That's what I want them to be thinking about, to know they're doing enough, they're doing more than they know, and that it's going to have a really important impact.
All right, well, thank you, Coach, for those inspiring words. And that's going to be our last point made today in this conversation. Dr. Sarah Brin, Clarissa Harwell, and Dr. Megan Salih, thanks for the knowledge.